Okay, I'm gonna have to re-record this video here because I had a microphone problem and I didn't notice it until I got a ways into it. But I think we can still get by without you watching what I did here. But I'll try to remember all the little things I did here because they're not critical to this video here. I just wanted to fix a few things. So a couple things that I did was I added in water. So this is just the Water Daytime Pro out of the standard assets, and in under environment, you'll find it under the prefab here, Water Pro Daytime. So I just dropped that in there and scaled it up here so that you see how big it is, this big red circle there. Okay, just big enough that the island fits in there, and our clipping plane is beyond it. So that'll take care of the water. Next, let's go back over here. Come on, Cube. I just want to kind of get back into my scene. All right. Whoops. I'm used to navigating by the keyboard. The next thing I did was address some target ring issues I had, where the target ring wasn't showing up. And the problem with target ring was twofold. But they're both kind of minor things. Let's see if I can find the code up here. Yeah, here's the target ring thing. First of all, I got rid of this fall off texture inside the shader. And then I got rid of this code down here that was just applying fog and fall off. That's not enough to really fix the problem. But the biggest problem, it turned out, was, and that's why I have Cube moved over here on the grass, by the way. No, not the billboard. Cube. Was that it turns out that the target ring was just being blown out by this very bright texture down here. I didn't really take into account. In the past, I've worked with smaller textures. With darker textures like the grass, and they show up okay over here. Now, you may notice that I've got some multicolors here. And so I did that because I didn't want any one single texture like the red to blend in too much with the sand. I was afraid that was part of what was going on. So I wanted something that was a little bit more contrasty. The yellowish stuff in here, I think what's going on there is that I went into Photoshop to edit the target ring mask and made a few mistakes in there where the mask isn't properly opaque. So that's something I'll fix later. But to get the multicolor effect, while I was in there messing around, it wasn't too much more work to take and split the target ring into three pieces, which is the circle and the two inner and outer stars. I then went into the target ring, and I created some materials for the outer star, the outer circle, the inner star, and these were based on these rings here that I took and split this up, and then I created a smaller ring in the inside, and then I assigned them to three separate projectors, and I can only have one projector on a game object, so I made three separate HDR projectors with different colors, and then attached them to this one parent, and then as it moves around, it drags the others with it. The benefit of doing this, actually, one of the things that's going to be kind of a good thing, is that I could choose to animate them differently. I could take and make one of these stars turn around clockwise, the other turn around counterclockwise. Maybe that might be interesting to see. Animated target rings are a little easier to spot, but so that's the target ring. The next thing I did was I added in this hut here, and this is a model off the asset store, part of their medieval hut and tents package that you can get for $15. It's sunk a little bit into the ground. I also flattened the terrain around here a bit. That's okay. We're on a hill, and I don't want the part of up in the air. Most structure models are or should be designed so that they can be buried a little bit into the ground so there are no gaps beneath them. And that's also kind of what the rocks are there. Now this is from the model that they provided, so that wasn't, they did that just because of this, so that if you were on the hill a little bit, you'd have those rocks underneath you. Okay, now the hut turned out had no colliders on it, so I created a mesh collider on wood here, and I just said make this because it turns out that this wood sticks around here are the outer part of this hut. And so with the mesh collider, thunk, I run into it and I can't go through it. And I can bonk my head on that piece over here. The little grass part up here, I can go through. Not worth it for me to fix that. That's just another mesh collider on one of those cylinders. And then I left the doorway open. It's a different material, so we can go through it. That's kind of cool. Alright, the reason I did this, and I moved it off to the side here, was that I want to discuss how to spawn mobs into the world. This is going to be a subject of this video. Right now we have these orcs over here walking around, and they were statically created. I drug their prefabs in and dropped them into the scene. So Unity didn't put them there. If I were to go and do combat right now and kill one of them, I'd have to remove it from the world, and nothing would replace it. So we're going to have a little bit different system here, and that means I'm going to want to create some locations where they will fit into the world. I'm going to create a spawning system that's based on EverQuest's spawning system. I think that's very complex, but it's easy to put together, and it gives us a lot of flexibility. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to define points around something, and the hut is a good place there. I can have them milling around or doing something around the hut, and that makes a little bit more sense than just out here on the sand. And so I will create some points that will be potential spawn points for my orcs. And then I will let the game decide when to create them. Okay, so I will have a manager script that will look through all of the locations and decide who to build. So we're going to have to define several new concepts here. One of them is going to be the spawn group. Spawn group is a set of spawn points. So I will define a spawn group for, say, this hut and the area around it. Then I will define a set of spawn points there. They will be empty game objects that I will put into the scene. And they will be specially named game objects that I will put into a container. So it'll be an empty game object that'll just have all the spawn points in the world. You don't have to see them. It doesn't really matter what their name is or anything like that. But what will happen is that I will create a spawn group object, and I will give it the spawn points. And then when the game comes again, it'll go and find the spawn group for this hut, find all the spawn points, and then it will then randomly assign things to spawn points. Not spawning all of them. I might give, say, 10 spawn points for this hut area. There'd be 10 possible locations and facings of a creature when it spawned into the world. And I might say you can have 3 up at any given time. So it'll then just pick of the ones that are not being used right now, spawn something in there. So the next time we respawn, we might find them in different locations. So they won't always be in the same spot all the time. The next thing we'll want to have, though, is something called a spawn entry, and that will be a record for the spawn group, and it will say you may have these types of creatures. And right now we have 1 orc, but if I had other types, and the easiest thing would be for me to do is to make more than 1 type of orc. Okay, I can make more than 1 type of orc. I can give them slightly different names, and we can't really see their orc names too well over there. I might have to fix that text up a little bit so that it's a little bit more readable. You should be able to see it from a distance, and it probably needs some sort of outline or something so that blue on dark blue doesn't blend in too much. But we would have names there that would indicate what the type is. So between the model and the name, that would tell you what we had. So the spawn entry would say these are the types of creatures that will be created around the hut. And they'll have a probability. So there'll be a probability distribution for those. I might have some regular orcs that occur most of the time. Then I might have a slightly rarer orc that might occur some of the time. And I might have like a boss orc who shows up very rarely. And so the luck of the draw, what's going to be up when you walk by. So when you see the hut, we might see our boss orc. If we don't and we want to fight the boss orc, we'd have to come over here and then start killing some of the orcs. And then once they died, we'll want a spawn timer that will start up, and it will respawn the orc after that timer expires. The spawn timer can have a little bit of variability, that's fine, but we want a rough idea of how distant the spawns are. Now, inside the EverQuest, they have the spawn timers generally are zone-wide. But if we look at the data structures, they were really assigned per spawn entry, and they just set them all the same within a zone. The reason that we would want to have that variability is that we might have a certain super rare spawn that we wanted to be on a different timer. So we put maybe a separate spawn entry, like say inside the hut or something like that, where we might have the king orc or something like that. We could have him spawn in a special creature that was on a very long respawn timer. So maybe that respawn timer is an hour. Maybe in an MMO it might be in days. Okay, some of the big dragons in EverQuest will have their respawn timer set to like once a week or once every 2 weeks. So so they don't immediately respawn when you kill one. And but we would want them to guarantee that they would be up sort of within a range there. So we give some variability to the spawn time, but it would be in a large range. And our regular creatures might have a smaller spawn time. It might be 5 minutes or so. It depends on what type of a scene we're doing. Now, 5 minutes actually is a very fast respawn there, because it might take you a couple of minutes to kill one of those. So if I set them respawn time in 5 minutes, I put several orcs around there, you wouldn't be able to finish combat with one before another would respawn. Some of the camps at EverQuest might have respawn times set somewhere around 12 to 20 minutes for a camp, and that would allow you, if you were very efficient, to take out all of the creatures around a camp and have a few minutes of downtime before they would start respawning on you. But you can adjust that. You can adjust the timers. But that's what we're going to do. Alright, so I think that's enough discussion here. Now, there are two types of objects data in the world. I'm not sure if I mentioned this because I am redoing this video. One of the types of information are going to be those spawn locations. And the best way to enter those is within the editor. Okay, and I'll show you why that's the case there. So I'm going to create a spawn, and we'll redo this kill camp too, by the way, because this, I'll rename it Orc Camp 0 because it's going to go away. I want to create an empty game object down here, and this is going to be my spawn point here. Whoops. Now the spawn point's sitting here up in the air or something like that. Well, I don't care where it is right now. Okay, you can just be out there in the middle. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to take my orc prefab and my let me find my prefabs, and let's just drag orc in here, and I'll drop him someplace. Now he shows up in the scene. This is just a stand-in for. I am having trouble seeing what's going on here. He's just a stand-in for the mob I'm going to spawn. It doesn't have to be the same model. It wouldn't hurt to have them to be the same model, but I can say I might want to have an orc who's facing this way. Let's put him over by the door. Okay, and I'll drag him over here. And so he'd maybe stand there. Are you on the ground? I can't really tell. You're close to it. Don't want him to get stuck in the ground. Okay, so I might say that that's a good place there. The reason I put him there is I want this transform. Okay, I want this transform. So I'm going to copy this component, which is a transform. I'm going to find my spawn point, and I'm just going to paste component values. Now my spawn point takes the same place, but you can't see it. Now see this little multicolored box up here? I'm going to pick an icon, and now he has, and now I can get the orc and move him out of the way here. Which orc are you? Are you this orc? Yes, you are. Let's rename you to placeholder orc, so I can spot him because I don't want to remove the other ones just exactly yet. Okay, so we get him out of the way. There's my spawn point. The spawn point has the same transform information as this guy, so but it won't appear in the world. This icon doesn't show up, so I'm going to rename this spawn point orc 1 1. Okay, this is going to be my orc camp 1. And so they'll have a name there, and that will indicate. I will go and place a few more of these. So I'm going to pause the video and place a few more of these around here. Well, let me place another one just so you see the process again. I moved this guy over here to someplace. Let's move this around here. So move the camera up. I want him to be back here under the shade a little bit. Not in the wall, but out of it. Okay. And I guess it's okay if he faces that way. I might rotate him a little bit this way. Yeah. Okay, so that's my transformation. My spawn point here, I'll just duplicate him and rename this guy to be spawn point 2. Oops. And I will find my placeholder orc, copy the transform, select the spawn point, and paste the values. And then spawn point 2 is there in the world. So you can see spawn point 1, spawn point 2. And move my placeholder out of the way so I can see this again. Okay, so the placeholder is helpful, especially if it's this model here, so I can place him in the world. Most of the time the model's position is based on his feet. So that's where his, essentially his pivot point would be. We can see that this position here is based on his feet there. So by setting, even if I scaled him or did something else like that, which I could do, his feet should be in the same spot. And so I can drop him in any of these spawn points, and he'll take on the position and orientation of that spawn point transform. So let me go make a few more of these, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've created 8 spawn points here. Now they're just sitting out here at the top level, so I'll probably want to go and create another camp object for them. And this is going to be orc camp 1. This will be the first real orc camp. And I'll take these spawn points and maybe for now put them in here, although I have a feeling that I'm going to want to move them and assign them to somebody else. Or now they can probably sit there in that spawn point. That's fine. That way I can go to my camp and I can find all my spawn points. I'm going to create another game object that will hold the spawn information, but it can hold it in an array of transforms. So the other information that we might want to have would be information on the actual NPCs themselves, which we saw with our NPC and mob classes that we had inside the mobs directory. Remember, we have mob and player, don't have NPC yet. NPC is just another C# script that will be called NPC for non-player character. If I recall looking at mob here, I think I made this observation in class, that aggro and de-aggro range do not belong to mob itself because players are mobs. And so players do not aggro or de-aggro based on some value in a file. They choose when to do that. But the NPC, on the other hand, is going to not have any of this. It's not going to be a mono behavior. It's going to derive from mob. And then I'll bring it down here and give it this 2 pieces of data that for now we've defined as aggro and de-aggro range. So, but the mobs, the NPC, since it is a mob, is going to have all of this other stuff in it that will need to be filled in. Okay. Getting that data and this type of stuff and what are the acceptable ranges and all of that is not something I'm going to enter in through the scene editor. I want, and that's one of the reasons why I don't like those what are those scriptable objects, because you have to enter them in through that scene editor. It seems like maybe there's another way of doing it, but I prefer to enter this in Visual Studio, and so that's where I'm going to go with that. So that's the information on the NPCs themselves. So our goal for the spawn system then is to answer several questions. When do we spawn a mob? So what time would we do that? What do we spawn of our different types of orcs or possibly other types of creatures that we might have? What are we going to spawn there? And where do we spawn it? And that would be which of these spawn points do we pick? Okay, so that was going to be our big goal here. Now, just having right now the models themselves are just and we can take a look at our placeholder orc. I think I got rid of them now. But if we looked at one of our orcs in the camp here, this is just a model with some animations and some scripts attached to it there. Okay, now true, the waypoints that it would have and its behavior, now those types of things would vary between one camp and another. So I might want to consider not putting them in there with their waypoints because I could I don't want mobs running all over the world back over here to these little boxes here so that they can run around inside of it. So I'm not going to really do that. But I want that information to be, and most of this information can just be pulled out of the prefab. Some of this stuff is going to have to be overridden. That's the type of data that we're going to need to save in some sort of a management object, some sort of a database object. Now, I could attach that data to a script and put it in the prefab, but that means we're going to have to customize it every time. Also, I don't want the information to be part of the prefab because, you see, when we leave the scene, then all of these creatures go away. I could mark them to be don't dispose of this object when the scene ends, but that means it's going to be taking up memory and staying here while we're off in another scene. You know, I might have another island. So that's a wasteful thing there. I want to keep kind of a lightweight description of the objects. And my mob class and my NPC are really, that bit of data is probably pretty lightweight. Okay, so I think that will be pretty good. If it's a problem, I can try to strip it down later. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have that data persist. That data is going to be created, and I can attach it to the creature at spawn time, but I don't want to have that be attached into the prefab, because I want to let the orc model go away, and then we come back into the scene. We should be able to respawn the world, and we should be able to not only respawn the world, but I mean we could keep track of what was up in the scene when we last left and put it back. So this gives me a chance to do that. I might have to put a little bit more information inside my NPC class, like maybe its transform, if it's in the world, because it's going to represent a live creature in the world. So I might keep its transform and any other data that's likely to vary between one NPC and the other. So one orc to another, what differences are there? Well, the transform's part of it, and their health and other things, their behaviors, that can change. So I want to be able to have it so that you can leave the scene and come back to the scene and have things be back the way they were. I don't want to respawn the entire world every time you come back into the scene, because that's going to be unfair, and it also gives you a way to kind of exploit the game mechanics, because if you're looking for something that's a very rare creature, rather than going and killing all of its placeholders, its people in its spawn group there who are taking its place, you could just interleave until you got the spawns that you wanted. So we don't prevent that. We prevent that by kind of keeping that information around and forcing you to actually play through the game. Now I was going to talk briefly. I'm not sure if I really want to talk a little bit about AAA games and open world maps. Normally, large scenes, they wouldn't have that zoning behavior as I described. Many games have large open world maps that aren't chopped up into discrete sections. I've chopped mine up into discrete sections because they're easier to manage. They're easier for Unity to manage. There are ways around that, though. It is possible to take a very, very large terrain and chop it up into little pieces and use a streaming component. You could buy one of those off the asset store that would keep track of what assets are nearby, ensure that they're in the world, but then let everybody else disappear. And then as you move through the scene, you would start bringing more assets in to repopulate those areas. So we only have a certain small number of assets up and alive in the world at a time, but those would be centered around where the player is. The alternative then is to have a static piece of geometry like this island, and say that when you leave the island, this whole island will just go away. We'll bring in a new island. You'll work there. My approach is sort of a hybrid, because I'm talking about keeping information on the creatures, but just loading them when you go back to the island again. So it's not quite streaming, but it is a workable solution. I have no real objection to having discrete chunks of the world with loading screens. I mean, it does work well. I can think of a number of AAA games that still do that. But we do want it to be able to be put back together. So one of the things I'm going to do is create this idea of a zone manager object that will manage a single running zone. When the zone starts up, which will be initially when the game starts, but also when you do a scene transition into that scene, this object will be responsible for populating the initial world or repopulating it if there is data associated with objects that are in there. Like, for example, if I had NPCs in the world, they're not managed by Unity. Okay, they're not managed by Unity, but I could always have Unity go and look them up if I had another object that was if I had another place to store all that information. I don't want to let them just float out into the world. Attaching them to their orc isn't good enough, because the orc will go away. So I might have another container object that sits off and says that this is all the stuff that belongs to this island, and then we will just bring it back in when you revisit the island. So that's what the zone manager is going to be. And the other thing to keep in mind too, and the reason for spawning and having the spawn control, is to give us a little bit more control over things. I don't want things just to pop up randomly. I don't want various. I mean, it's good to have a scene with different levels or different difficulty creatures, so that there's a natural progression where you start here and you work your way to tougher and tougher stuff. And when you can't handle something, you back off and go back to the easier stuff until you're able to handle the tougher stuff. So that means then that we want to have certain areas that have stuff that's of an easier difficulty. The alternative is to try to scale everything, but the problem with that is then that really kind of takes the gameplay out of it, because you're always facing things that are about your level. There's no, I want to go over here, but I can't get there yet because there are tough things guarding it. That, I think, is an important part of gameplay you lose with scaling. Okay, I don't want everything to scale there. I want you to be able to have things that are too tough for you to deal with, that you have to get tougher till you can get to that. And so that means keeping discrete sections. We can manage that with our spawn group. I can set up a spawn group for this orc 1 here around this hut that will have lower level stuff, and then put something that's higher level down the beach someplace, and hopefully some mechanism in the game to let you know that that's too tough for you. Most games would have a mechanic that existed prior to these video games like this. It existed from the text-based MUDs, the multi-user dungeons, where you would just say, consider this, and it would tell you how tough it was. So what we would do then is we would, in a game like this, be able to target something far away from us, say consider, and have it tell you this thing is just way, way too tough. Some games today will tell you just exactly how tough it is in terms of what level it is, so that you know that it's just a little too tough or a lot too tough. EverQuest, when it first came out, gave it to you in a color system where they would list things as green if they were just barely above you, or I'm sorry, below you, but not too far below you. They were gray if they were too far below you, that you wouldn't even get experience for dealing with them. Green would get a little bit. White would be the same level as you are. Yellow would be tougher than that. And then red. Oh, there was a blue con that was a little bit tougher than the greens. So it would go blue, green, blue, white, yellow, red. And they added in a few other little colors in between there, like kind of a light green and a bluish green and stuff like that, just to give it a little bit more levels. But frankly, just having, if you saw something that was red, it's probably going to kill you. And so you just kind of knew to back off and leave it. And then if you were really brave, you'd try it anyway and find out which things were just a little bit red or really, really red. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here. The spawn points now are being marked with game objects that are mainly their transforms, and they won't appear in the scene when we won't see them. And now the spawn entries, we're going to tell them about the mobs are at those locations. And so I think that we can probably start with some scripting here now, finally, half hour into the video. And I see I already have a mob script over here. I think I'll just go ahead and put some stuff in here for like my spawn point. Now, why would I need something for my spawn point? Or let me think. Maybe I want this to be the spawn group. Let me just check my notes here. Yeah, we are going to need to script 4 spawn points, and that's because we need to know if a spawn point is being used. This will be a mono behavior because we will have we will be putting the spawn points are being put into the scene as empty game objects. I'm going to create a public int called a spawn group, and that'll make more sense once we define the spawn groups. But we will have we'll identify which spawn groups these belong to, so they can get sorted and put in their correct spots. Then a boolean in use, and I will just say that to false right here. I think this will be fine for us right now. Now, if I take and save this off and go back out to my spawn point right here, and I was going to make a prefab for this, and I think I probably should do that. However, these should have been all in the same prefab so that I could take care of them. So I think I will pause the video after making a prefab, but let me first take my spawn point script and attach it here. And I don't want the in use to be something you can click here to turn on and off. So let me just look at that really quick here and to say I still want it to be a Boolean so it can be accessed from outside the spawn point. And so what I'll do is I'll say hide in inspector. That will that little tag will cause it not to be seen. So we'll have to wait for it to recompile it, and then once it does, this should disappear. There it goes. Okay, so now we have a way of setting a spawn point. And I will go to my prefabs that I have right there, and I will drag my spawn point in here, and I will rename this to be spawn point. Now I'm going to have to go and make all these instances of that. I will rename this one here SP-orc11, and that's okay. And so what I'm going to do for this, I will drag another prefab into the scene, and I'll just fix this for spawn point 2, so you see what I mean here. Copy the transform, or I'll just copy this, find my new spawn point here, and paste the component value so it takes over the same spot here. Drag it down into the camp, and this is going to be number 2 here, SP-orc12. Okay, so that spawn point is, well, not where I expected it to be. Where are these spawn points here? Take me over here. So I seem to have lost that. Let's see if I can undo that. And there's spawn point 2 right there. I will copy the component, go to spawn point, and paste its values. And then if I click on spawn point, you're there, and 2 is in the same spot. So I should be able to just delete this one and go to take this one and rename it to SP-orc12. Okay, so that is where it is, but it's still a member of the prefab. So any changes I make will update that. So I'm going to pause the video and do that so that everybody is still an instance of the prefab. Okay, I've done that. These are all now instances of the same prefab. So if I ever need to go and change spawn point, I can update the prefab, and all my spawn points will automatically update. What I don't want to have to do now, of course, I'll never have to wind up doing that now. But if I had to go through and manually change every single one of these, I would have forgotten one or something like that, and it would have been just a mess. So we have our script here that is attached to the spawn points. Let's verify that all of these have the script. That's why they're instances of the prefab. And I will go ahead and now just mark these as spawn point 1 so that unassigned spawn points will be a little bit more visible. Okay. Now, how do I know what spawn point I should use? Well, it's easy when you have 1. It's always 1. But how do I know that I don't have spawn point 2 or spawn point 3 or something like that? If I have several spawn groups, how do I know what the next one is? I don't have a list of them anywhere. So let's work on how we might be able to solve that one here. So it's a little bit of a digression, but I think it's an important one. I want my spawn points to have a little bit more information here in the editor about what spawn groups are available. And so the way I'll do that is I will go into, I guess I'll go back down into mobs. Is that where they are? I'll create it down here. I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call it editor, because I'm going to make an editor extension. And those are all loaded out of folders named editor. It doesn't matter where they are in the project, just as long as they're in here. And then I will create a script. And this will be called spawn point editor, and it'll be a C# script. Now we'll wait till What? Ignore that. What are you talking about? What solution are you doing? Okay, I just want this spawn point editor to be created here. I don't need any of the collections, so that's not going to be needed. I will need a Unity Engine, maybe. I think I will. And then I'll want Unity Editor. Why are you not auto-completing this? Let's just save that out there, see if there's a problem here. Okay, the spawn point editor is not going to be a mono behavior. It's going to be of type editor, because we're no here. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here. And I want to declare as a custom editor down here. That might be confusing this, but custom editor type of spawn point. And why are you, something is not, unless they've changed something on me, that is how it should look. Okay, spawn points are in our class that are public, so you shouldn't have that problem there. Spawn point editor is editor. I'm not going to need this stuff in here, I don't think, because editors use the old Unity user interface code, which is not like the new retain mode stuff that we had at Unity 4.6. So there will be an override for void on inspector GUI. Okay, so this is a routine. It's called every frame to update this. And so what I'm going to want to do is, first of all, I want to call the base stuff. So I will draw default. Something is not right here at all, and I'm trying to get to see what might be default inspector. It takes it. Well, why is it not auto-completing any of this? All right. I'm going to want to have a. I'm going to want to check this periodically. I don't want this to fire off all the time. So I think what I want to do here is to create a static int, and I'll call it last sample time equals 0. This is going to periodically sample the world, and what I will do is to say int cur time equals an integer time dot. Whoa, something is just so not right here. The time class. All right, let's go find time. It didn't used to be in a separate field or a separate package. And I looked at the documentation. It says that it's in Unity Engine. But Unity Engine's there. You're just really bugging me on what's going on here. Unless that's the documentation for 2018.2. It says class in Unity Engine implemented in Unity Engine.core module, but I don't think I should have to be able to take that time Unity Engine.core. Something is not right here. This is an example of, I think, of what I'm seeing here is Visual Studio just being weird here. And before I go any further here, I'm just going to kill it. So Visual Studio is completely dead. And then bring up my spawn point editor again. Every time I see Unity Visual Studio just being stupid, I start to wonder. And okay, so now it says I can't find spawn point. Well, did I not create a class for spawn point? I thought I did, and let's see, did I not do that? Like right there, this is spawn point with a lowercase p, which means that I've this one makes a little bit more sense here. I'm going to have to rename that spawn point. Oops. I don't know if that's going to be enough to do it, but spelling does usually count in this, and that seems to have cleared that bit up here. The problem I was having though was int cur time equals int time dot. Now I see it. You see, that was definitely a bug in it wasn't this business up here. That's a bug in Visual Studio that it just lost the ability to autocomplete things, and so that's time dot real time since startup. So just give me that value there. Now, and I will say if cur time is greater than last sample time, then I'm going to go and want to sample it again, but I'm just going to say last sample time equals cur time. Okay, now it does nothing. The script does nothing. But I will fix that here in a second, and I'm going to find the largest ID, private void largest ID. I can have it return something if that seems like a good deal. Well, all right, I'll return an int. But I would probably just put it into its own int largest equals 0. And so I want to create a spawn point count up here. Static int last ID equals 0. Static int spawn point count equals 0. And I'm going to need some way of knowing where the spawn points are here. So let me just declare spawn point array of these, all spawn points equals game object. And this is a great use of this thing I hardly ever use, and that's find objects of type, plural, and that will look for type spawn point. Okay, this will find all of them and put them into this array. And then what I can do is come down here and say spawn point editor dot spawn point count equals all spawn points dot length. And then what I'll do is say for each spawn point SP, these are the spawn points we look at in all spawn points. So we're going to iterate over all of the spawn points we've looked in. I want to say if sp dot spawn group, this property down here, if that's greater than largest, then I will set largest to sp dot spawn group, and so that will give me my last there, and then I will just return largest out of here, and then I can go back up here and say in my periodic polling last ID equals largest largest ID, and that will pull it in. Alright, now I'd rather this didn't run all the time, but I could probably put some code in there to slow it down here. But now how am I going to expose this to the user? I just calculated this value, but we're not seeing it. So this is where we're going to have to create a GUI layout. And this is the type of stuff that we had to do back before the 4.6 user interface. So this is going to be an editor GUI layout dot prefix label, and this is going to be called spawn points, and I'll create a label there, editor GUI layout. So I'm just coming off of my notes here, dot label field spawn point count dot to string. That's what I want you to do. So now it'll give me that, and then I can say GUI layout dot end horizontal. Okay, so I just defined one little field there, and then I can say I'll just copy this again. I'm going to make a separate horizontal layout. And that's what the editor is making, are these horizontal layouts here. And this will be largest spawn group ID. And that won't be spawn point count, that will be last ID. And I think we're good. I think we really are. Let's see how this works. Here in my spawn point, I'll let that editor rebuild itself and see if it keep my eye on the status thing down there. Not multi-object editing not supported. Well, that's weird. What's the console have to say here? Yeah, okay. None of that is really okay. Multi-object editing not supported. Let's see if I can figure out what that is. That's a new one on me. Did I mess up something somewhere in this script? Okay, so I might as well just pause the video while I look over the script very carefully, because I don't think I made any mistakes. This is some new behavior, I think. I wish you could have seen this. This is crazy. All I had to do was just select and reselect it again. I had the object selected before the editor extension loaded, so it got confused and thought I was trying to edit two objects. Once I reselected it, we see that I have 8 spawn points and the largest spawn group is 1. If I were to go up here and change this to 5, then this would then it updates a little bit and shows me 5. It's not too bad because it's going. We're not making changes in editor and having it up and running very frequently, so I don't think it's really going to take too much. But it is a nice thing to have so that we can see what number of spawn points in the world and how many spawn groups there are. That's an editor extension for you. Okay, and these are just static labels here. I could make editing fields there, but if I wanted a field like this, I just create a variable. Here I've created something that is now derived from a script and being put up there. So that's kind of cool. So you got that for our time. I'm coming up close to an hour, which is where I would like to cut these off here. But let's do one more thing here, and that is I want to create another manager class. Now I have this manager's object which runs scripts here, so it has a target manager. I'm just going to create another manager to fit underneath here, and let's see where those scripts are. I may have to create another folder for all these things if I create too many more. And this one here is going to be called the zone manager. The zone manager is something that is is only up while the zone is running, so it's not a persistent structure. So I want it in the scene. It'll be created when the scene loads and destroyed when the scene goes away. If I want data to persist, I'll have to put it someplace else. Start is okay. This will also serve as initialization for the zone. So once the zone manager starts up, we can create other things or fix other things that need to happen when the zone starts up. So this is our way of starting that. What I want to do is to load the spawn points. Now, when we think about where what's going to cause that to happen, because loading up the spawn points is probably going to be something that somebody else is going to initiate. I can do it right from here. I think will be fine for right now. But I don't think I need an update here. I will need something similar to it in a little bit, but I'm going to create a timer later on that will be part of this. Public void load spawn points. Now, should this be public? Well, I'll make it private for right now. But there's some reasons why I might want to make it handle this later. I'm going to do something very much like I did in the editor. Net editor extensions equals game object dot find objects of type spawn point. That will load all of them. This only gets done once when the zone starts up, and then for each spawn point SP in spawn points. Okay, iterate over all of them again. And now what I would want to do is to actually spawn that thing. Now, why is game object having a problem here? Is cannot convert spawn point to a spawn. This should be find objects of type. I always get those messed up, but usually I'm making it the other way. I get the plural when I want the singular. We're going to need to have those points spawned. We're going to need to tell somebody to spawn something here, or rather I should say, we're going to have to tell somebody about this. Do I want the zone manager to manage these spawn points? No, I don't. I'm going to create another manager down here. I know, another one. Come on. Create C# script, and we'll fill these in later. This is going to be the NPC manager. It will manage the NPCs in a zone. So this guy is going to want to have this is not going to be a Unity managed object. This is going to persist across calls there. So therefore it will not have start update methods, because it's just a thing that we create. Now I have to think about whether I want to create this as a singleton. I think I do. So let's go ahead and do the singleton thing again, and that's a private static. In this case, it's an NPC manager. It returns and stores an instance that's initialized to null. The NPC manager will have a private constructor. So private NPC manager. Why are you namespace cannot directly contain members such as oh, this should be inside the class. I am just really not thinking here. I didn't see what I was doing there. The NPC manager will have a private constructor that will take no parameters, so that's to be expected. I'll make the public interface here, public static NPC manager instance. Remember, it must be static and public. This means that this function will exist even if I don't have any NPC managers up. This instance will exist here even if I don't. It'll be initialized to null, and it's up to this guy to say if instance is equal to null, then then I will want to say instance equals new NPC manager. So that will create it, and then so once I'm guaranteed to have it up by this point, I can just return instance. So that will give us back the instance. So this is a bare singleton now that doesn't have anything in it. What about the spawn points? Okay, so what am I going to do about those spawn points? I'm going to need to store those someplace or do something with them. Now, I don't know that I did anything with them, decide what I was going to do there, but I'm going to notify the NPC manager of them. So I want to have something that will take new spawn points come in and will tell us about that. So I will create a public Boolean spawn point, because what I will well, here, I'll just make it a void for right now, and we'll talk about it here. And that's going to be add spawn point. And I will want to say what the group ID is. That spawn group knows that. And the spawn point to be added. So we'll have to do something with this. Okay, and then I will want to look up the spawn group from this group ID and add this to the group. If the group doesn't exist, we'll think about that now. You know, do I want to handle it if the spawn group doesn't exist there? Do we automatically create it? Probably that I would want to do that. But I want to be notified from the zone manager, and that'll be probably enough for us right now to do that. And so I will say something like npc manager.instance.add spawn point, and it takes the group ID, which would be sp.spawnGroup, and it'll take the spawn point, which would be sp. Okay, and that says add this point to this group. Okay, so that's what the zone's going to do when it comes up, is it will just go and find all the spawn points and then hand it over here to this group. Where do the groups come from? And that's going to be where we're going to be very careful about the ordering of things to do. I said the spawn points could be loaded out of here. Well, that's fine, but we need to make sure that the spawn entries are loaded first, the way I kind of do things. When the spawn entries come in, that would be one place to create the groups. I suppose I could do it down here. Let me think about what the impact of that is going to be. Okay, I think that the spawn entries can get loaded first because the spawn points were created in the scene, but the spawn entries are going to be something that we will private void load spawn entries. That's going to be the type of data that I said that is going to be handled differently than the stuff that's done graphically in the scene. Spawn entries are going to be data we're just going to type into this file here. So I can have that be loaded first, and that will create the spawn groups. Let's talk a little bit about what those spawn groups and spawn entries look like, and they're going to be just data structures that I can put in this file. They can be interior classes. Okay. Now, and they'd be interior classes to the, I don't mean here in spawn entries. That's going to be something for the NPC manager here. Okay, so that could be done in here, and what we will want to do is to have an interior class that would have, that would define this. So a private class, and I might say, well, I'll make this public because I might want to share it. Public class spawn entry. And a spawn entry is just going to have some idea of what type of an NPC type it's going to be. Well, I probably had better define those, shouldn't I? Okay, so as another private class, this will be private NPC type. And NPC type will say things like public string name. So that would be something like an orc. That will have to be an enumerated type to tell you what type of an NPC it is. So we will have to define those. And I'll do that next time. But also a public string prefab name. More than one type. So that might be orc prefab. I can have more than one orc NPC that can share the same prefab. All the prefab does is just really have the model information in there and the animations and that type of stuff. Many different orc types could share the same animations if I was very careful, so I think that would be okay to do. I would want to have a public float scale. And I'll show you how that works later, but I might want to shrink or grow certain types of them so that they look a little bit different. Public float attack range. Now you saw that in the mob, didn't you? This will be, put this in mob. When we instantiate the object, this information is it's going to the attack range and public float aggro range and public float de-aggro range. All of that stuff can get shoved into this. Now, what if the attack range is variable? For the purposes of what I'm doing right now, I'm not going to make it variable. I'm going to give them each type of orc will have a certain attack range. They can be hand-to-hand, so they're up close. I might have an orc that uses ranged combat, so they can be further out. And so this type of information is going to be just put into a particular table. The NPC type is going to need a constructor, and this is just going to let me load up a table really easily. So it's just going to take all of this stuff here, string prefab name, float scale. The rest of this stuff can be looked up later once we look up the type name here. This dot name equals name. This is how we differentiate formal parameters from our properties of the object. So prefab name equals prefab name. This dot scale equals scale. Okay, those things are not going to change, but now I could look them up by their name. I'm probably going to want to have something else to help me track that stuff here. So let me think about how we're going to do this. I really would like to have maybe an enumerated type for this. So let me think how that's going to. Okay, I think I see how I want to do this. And so what I'm going to do is to create a public enum, NPC enum, that's just going to list all the different types of NPCs. This is okay for a class like the NPC manager to have. And so I might say NPC orc, NPC elemental orc, who could be a spellcaster, NPC boss orc. And those are my types of orcs that I have. I would want to have a do I want to make this public or not? I think I do. NPC enum, and that will be the type ID. That will just be a symbolic type for this, so I don't have to do string comparisons on it. This also means that I want my NPC enum, which will be like I don't know, type NPC well, type ID. I'll just call it type ID, just like I did everything else here. And then I can just move the mouse down here and say this dot type ID equals type ID. Okay, so that saves it off in there. The spawn entry is going to be, so what's a spawn entry? This is where we might have an NPC enum to say what NPC type ID, or I'll just call it type ID. Let's call it the same thing here. And then for this we'll say public int chance and public int. Now the chance is going to be a percentage chance that we will spawn it. So for each time we decide we're going to spawn something in a group, we will have a collection of these spawn entries, everything that belongs in that group there. So how many orcs can spawn near that building, near that hut? Well, I might say I want my 3 types there, and I distribute the 100% over 3 different pieces there, and then I would assign a particular chance to that. We just roll a random number, and that would indicate which one to pick under distribution, which is nice because we make some things rare and some things common. I also want to say public int limit. For a spawn entry, how many of those can I have? I might want to say I'm going to put a limit of 1 on my boss orc. Okay, and then we just say 0 means no limit, but I could say I'm only going to allow 1 boss orc to be up at once. If I have a spawn entry for it, even if it's a remote chance, and I have 8 spawn points up, it's possible that you could have more than 1 if I didn't somehow restrict it. So we're going to restrict it that way. And then there will be a constructor for this spawn entry. that will NPC enum type ID, int chance, int limit, and I will come down here and just do what I did just do before. This dot type ID, oops, that should be this, type ID equals type ID, this dot chance equals chance, this dot limit equals limit. Alright, so a lot of stuff here, and I haven't done anything yet, you might say, because we've just kind of been preparing this. But let me take a look at what it's like to build a spawn entry here. So I think I could probably do that in a couple of minutes here. So what I would say here is I want to, well, I'd have to work on how I was going to store the data and all that. So let me just stop the video right here. This is enough to kind of get started here, that we have kind of make sure I save all these files out here so I don't lose anything. Okay, so we have kind of a skeleton of stuff here. But how are we going to store it? I'm going to store it in dictionaries. Is where I'm going to store it. I love the dictionary class or type. It's a mapping container. So it's like what a Java map is, or I'm sorry, C++ has the maps in the STL. But what the dictionary lets me do is associate one data type with another. And so I can say things like, for example, I have my type ID is a key. I could have a list of spawn entries that just had that in there, and I could put them in a dictionary. I could have, so my spawn entries will get loaded into a dictionary. My spawn points, I don't know if I need to load those into a dictionary yet. I think I can probably just create a spawn group and add it to the spawn group. So that's another data type that we'll have to have here. Just data types for all these to contain information, and then we will pull it in from the world and some stuff that's typed in here and just load that stuff up. So you'll see that next time. Okay.